Welcome to the Movement Prescription Podcast. In this episode, I'm interviewing Dan Lavard and Sarah Georgian, who are both from an organisation called the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare. Sarah is a Green Space for Health Director, or was. She's an environmental psychologist by background, and she's a founder and former director of Hope for the Future. Sarah, just to kick us off, could you tell us a little bit about what environmental psychology is? Sounds fascinating.
Yeah, of course. So, environmental psychology is all about humans' connection with the wider world. So when I studied it, I was specifically looking at why people might know about big issues like climate change or the biodiversity crisis, but not be compelled to act about it, because that does happen a lot. And that's to do with things like the fact that it is such a big, an abstract issue, and human brains are kind of wired to deal with threats that are directly in front of us. So, something like climate change that is such a large scale and such a kind of abstract thing makes it really difficult for us to know how to respond to that and how to kind of deal with the emotions that it can bring up. Environmental psychology is about using psychology to get around that disconnect and learn how to communicate with people about these crises, with that knowledge. That actually led to my work at Hope for the Future, which you mentioned, which was all about developing techniques for how to communicate with politicians specifically about climate change.
Great. I'm glad you gave the elevator pitch for that. That was going to be my next question, because I Googled it. It sounds amazing, but you'll do it much better justice than I will. So, bro, thank you. Well, Dan, you're also involved in the Green Space for Health project. You're the project lead and previously worked with Warwickshire Wildlife Trust. And I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about what has made you passionate about green space, and then a bit about your personal journey into that world as well.
Yeah, sure. So from a very young age, the outdoors and nature has provided me with lots of opportunities for exploration. And my dad gave me my first pair of binoculars, and that sort of sparked that interest, really. And I've always found a lot of solace and inspiration in spending time outdoors. So a lot of people might have been gaming or doing whatever, but for me, it was very much hiking across various different landscapes, or in my more sort of current world, I, work from home a lot. So I really do reap the benefits from having a lunchtime walk and taking a quiet stroll in my garden. So it's those sorts of outdoor nature experiences that have deepened my connection with the natural environment. And as I've grown older, sort of from my younger years of being passionate about nature, I became increasingly aware of the threats that our natural environment faces. So what Sarah was saying about obviously climate change being a real sort of big forefront issue in a lot of our minds. So that fueled my interest and passion in environmental conservation and to take action to protect it.
Amazing. Yeah. I think you touch on some really interesting points there on a podcast about physical activity. One thing that we go on about is rediscovering the joy in movement. And often the joy comes from being outside, from whether it's the trees or the kind of the animals that we come across. That offers a lot of joy, and the context in which we move is really important. And then the other thing, and you both mentioned it, is climate crisis and how movement becomes a really important part of combating that, whether it's taking the bike instead of the bus or walking instead of the car. There's loads of ways it can work. So, bro, well, look, I'm excited to get going. You both work for Green Space for Health, which is part of the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare. And I wondered if we maybe start by one of you telling us a little bit about the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare kind of does what it says on the tin. So it's all about making healthcare more sustainable. So part of the organisation is very much working within clinical settings. So our clinical team works within specialties and looking at clinical pathways and seeing how we can reduce emissions along those clinical pathways. We also have our education team, which delivers training and produces courses all about sustainable healthcare and, again, how we can be reducing emissions within our healthcare services. And then our green space team, which is the team that Dan and I work in, and that's kind of centered around a key principle of sustainable healthcare, which is prevention of ill health, or creation of health, and recognizing the value of nature and green space in the health and well-being benefits that it provides. And within our green space team, we want to kind of help restore nature and bring that nature to where we feel it's needed most, which is within healthcare settings. So our kind of flagship project is the NHS Forest, and that is all about planting trees and restoring nature in hospitals or maybe at GP practices or anywhere on kind of NHS land, where, as I say, it's that's where it's needed most. That's where people need those health and well-being benefits from nature.
Oh, great, thank you. And I'll pick your brains on NHS Forest, and maybe Dan, you can launch into that shortly. But I really love what you kind of talked about in terms of green space, and one thing, I've done a bit of work when I worked in Copenhagen, and Hussein and I, one of the other hosts, have published a paper on urban green space and healthcare. And one of the things that repeatedly strikes me is what's good for our health is often good for the planet health as well. That preventative part is multifaceted, and it's quite reassuring actually that we're kind of hopefully moving in the right direction, or trying to persuade people to move in that direction. Dan, just bringing you in, Sarah touched on NHS Forests and what you're about. Are you able to just expand a bit more on that?
Yes, of course. Yeah. So what you were saying, Callum, about nature being a multifaceted marvel, like that's definitely something that we want to try and reinforce within the Green Space for Health team. And NHS Forest, in a sort of nutshell, if you like, is an alliance of healthcare sites working to transform their green space in a variety of ways. And the Green Space for Health team showcase their work through our website and a variety of different other avenues. So at the moment, there are 373 sites that have done some amazing work, from tree planting to therapeutic gardens. And this alliance, alongside our team, we're working together to help realise the potential of those sites for health, wellbeing and biodiversity, and encouraging more engagement with nature as well, and utilising those spaces for patient recovery and staff wellbeing. And within NHS Forest, there are three main programmes that we're delivering at the moment. So one of them's primarily focused around tree planting that's been funded through DEFRA. And we have an ambitious target of planting 150,000 trees across NHS sites, and we're progressing well. And they're fully funded trees as well. So just a bit of a plug there. Also, another project that we have, which is the one I lead on, is the Trees Call to Action Fund programme, which has many different branches to it. So, it complements the tree planting programme quite well, in that it provides ecological advice for sites. There's recruiting and supporting volunteers, and there's training healthcare professionals as well to build that capacity and knowledge to feel more confident with those next steps to greening up their estate in whatever way they can. And then lastly, we have another core program, which is around the nature recovery program. And they are working with NHS sites on the ground to improve the quality of their green spaces and helping patients and staff integrate into their estates by connecting with nature and hopefully involving the wider community as well where possible.
Great. Sounds amazing. And I remember from medical school I think it's the WHO define health not just as the absence of illness, but also, the presence of well-being. And I think acknowledging the power of green space, and hopefully we'll move on very shortly to talk about the impact it has on our health, is super important, and particularly in healthcare settings. And one of the questions I have for you is we talk about NHS spaces. This is a podcast that is for everyone, but often aimed at primary care, particularly, and primary care premises often work in a slightly different way. And so I know a question that will come up and has come up to me is this available for people that work in primary care and primary care premises as well?
It is, yes. I guess it's a kind of internal thing of where that funding exactly comes from. So our major funding from DEFRA, which, as Dan mentioned, funds 150,000 trees, that's coming from a tree planting on public land fund from the government. So that has to be NHS-owned land. And quite often we find that in primary care, it might be privately owned land or sometimes council-owned land. So there's a bit of technicality there, I suppose. However, we do have other funds available, the Trees Call to Action Fund that Dan mentioned, also tree sponsorships. So we welcome tree sponsorships through our website from individuals and businesses. And those can, they don't really have restrictions on them, so they can go wherever we want them to go. So yeah, absolutely. We do quite a lot of work with primary care sites. And as Dan talked about as well, it's not just tree planting. We also do like garden creation and therapeutic gardens. And we recently did some work with a project down in London who were doing vegetable growing at a GP surgery. And they've created a toolkit on how to start your food growing project at your local GP surgery, and all the benefits that can provide, and how to actually go about that.
That's absolutely amazing. I love that. You have to send me the link. I'd love to put that in the show resources. The toolkit for how to and is it patient led as well? Do the healthcare staff also involve patients in the process of the gardening?
Absolutely, yeah. So it covers all of that in the toolkit as well, about how to attract volunteers, whether that is patients or even just visitors or people within the local community. But yeah, also getting wider staff involved as well, and just really making it a kind of team and group effort. Because yeah, as I'm sure we'll talk about, the health and wellbeing benefits go beyond just the kind of physical wellbeing benefits, but also that community connection and that feeling of purpose and belonging that can come with getting involved in a community garden project and that kind of thing.
Yeah, bro. Well, that takes us on to the next thing I want to talk about. But just so everyone knows, if I work in primary care and I want to plant a tree, you have the money. And so we just need to contact you.
Yes.
Perfect.
Go to the NHS Forest website. We'd love to hear from you.
Great. Okay. So obviously, and we've touched on it already, and it leads on from what you're saying about gardening, but green spaces offer huge benefit across kind of a load of different areas, one of which is physical and mental well-being. And I was wondering if one of you might be able to just start by talking us through some of that evidence, and I'm sure the other one will be able to kind of add some more in. So yeah, maybe Dan, we can start with you.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So as you said, there's lots to talk about, and there's definitely a growing evidence base around the health and well-being benefits of being outside and connecting with nature. And there are quite a few recent research papers that I've come across, one around stress and how green exercise built environments influences sort of your resilience to stress and stress management in comparison to being out in a green space. So already that's showcasing how both the physical and mental benefits are so important. Also, nature does have a central role in creating therapeutic environments for calming the mind and body. I can just speak on a personal level how I know that if I'm getting overwhelmed in some way, I can take 10 minutes out in my garden or my local park, take my binoculars because I'm an avid bird watcher. And that connection really does distill the busyness in my mind. And I know that's anecdotal, but there is a lot of evidence to showcase that as well. And other things around viewing trees and other nature from windows. It's you don't even necessarily have to have like a more deeper connection with nature, even though that's definitely more beneficial. If people are in clinical environments and they have a greener view, then there is research to show that it will speed up their recovery, which is fantastic. And there's other aspects around staff wellbeing and reducing staff absences due to sickness. So there's some research I came across that showed that if people had trees as a viewpoint within their workspace, that there'd be fewer sick leave hours. And if you want to sort of link it to economic savings, then, you know, there is that benefit as well. And so having that as a calming backdrop will enhance people's experience in lots of different ways.
So what you're saying, Dan, is you'll pay for the trees and then the GP practices will benefit because staff will be much, much better. Great.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Yeah, no, that is really amazing. And I think, Joe, I kind of agree anecdotally that being in nature offers a perspective that we maybe don't otherwise get when we're caught up in the day-to-day kind of hustle and bustle of life. And whether it's looking at trees like you do, birds like you do, or I find that kind of the scale of mountains, and I'm very lucky to live up here in Scotland. It just offers perspective. Sarah, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think as you're both saying, it's something that we kind of know intuitively. Like, we know that nature is good for us. We know that it's good for our physical health and our mental well-being. But I think in recent years, there's just been an overwhelming amount of evidence to show that and to actually back that theory up. And quite recently, Natural England, in fact, I think it was earlier this week, Natural England released a review of reviews, which was looking at all of the different evidence and different reviews about how nature is good for our health and well-being. And it did, as you can imagine, conclude that exposure to green space, and especially in an urban setting, that's associated with improved psychological well-being, but also physical activity and linked health outcomes to that kind of physical activity and physical health. But it also highlighted that loss of biodiversity will lead to things like increased air pollution, and therefore also be a risk to health. So again, just really reinforcing that relationship between nature and our health. You know, the better nature is and the more biodiversity we have, the more our health will benefit from that.
I think you make a really interesting point. You talked about physical activity and mental health, that being in urban green spaces improves. And actually, what a lot of the evidence points, and I think it's self-intuitive that when you're outside enjoying nature, you're moving, whether it's running, walking, cycling, whatever way you move. But actually, being outside offers additional benefits beyond just that of movement. And that is to both physical and mental well-being. And so you can get an added boost to your health by doing physical activity outside rather than in the gym. Or likewise, if you're really struggling to move, you can just go and sit on a park bench or in a garden and get huge benefits from being outside. You mentioned that Nature England review. It sounds great. I've actually not seen it. There's also 2 reports from the WHO. One from 2021 called Nature, Biodiversity and Health, an overview of interconnections, which offers a really great summary of the health benefits of urban green space. And the second, which is really well named, is Urban Green Spaces, a review of the evidence. So yeah, I'll put them in the show notes as well. Dan.
Yes, I just wanted to jump in and talk about, I think, an aspect of green space improvements and the benefits from green spaces. It can sometimes be overlooked, and that's food security. So there's like trees in particular, but also other edible plants can play a really significant role with producing edible goods and can contribute to food security, promoting healthier eating habits, and fostering that community cohesion. I don't know if you're aware of, or that anyone on any of the listeners are aware of, like the surge and increase of community orchards. There's lots of different examples out there, and actually a village that I used to live in had a community orchard where there are residents that come together to plant, care for and harvest fruit trees, and lots of events that can come from that. So yeah, I wanted to touch on that because of the food autonomy that can come from growing something in a local green space, but the positive knock-on sustainability benefits from reducing carbon emissions because you're not relying on commercially grown produce. And like I said, that community health benefit as well by enjoying healthier foods and coming together as a group and enjoying a variety of different things like harvesting the fruit, which is something I've taken up as around the autumn time, and it's just such a fantastic thing to do.
Yeah, that's amazing. It sounds like a really cool community, and I think one of the things that you mentioned food autonomy, and I think what I'm reading in that is that it offers people a connection to food, and I think that connection, even if it's just to fruit trees, then sparks a curiosity in where the rest of the food comes from, and so it pays itself forward. It's a form of education.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Sarah, you mentioned trees and air pollution, which is one of the huge benefits that trees can have. Another, and I don't know if you've read much evidence around it, is noise pollution. And I know that, I find noise pretty unpleasant, and I know it can have knock-on effects on health. I suppose kind of trees also can act as a barrier as well to noise, can't they?
Yeah, I mean, trees have so many benefits and I could talk about them all day. But yeah, absolutely, getting maybe a linear row of trees or hedging can help act as a barrier to things like air pollution or to noise. So, if you're, say, for example, your GP surgery is right next to a really busy road, but you're wanting to develop some nice green space so that people can go and sit outside and just enjoy the space, but you've got that big road there, you could absolutely look at planting a row of trees or maybe some hedging to actually reduce the air pollution and kind of channel that, as well as the noise as well. It also has amazing benefits for reducing heat exposure. So, it doesn't feel it right now in April in England, but, when the summer comes and, we are experiencing hotter weather, trees can actually help to kind of acclimatize the local environment. And actually it has been shown, there's been research to show that fewer deaths linking to summertime heat. are related to trees, the level of tree coverage there, because of the cooling effects of trees. So we're not just talking, a bit of comfort here and there, but actually, relating to people's health and actually, reducing the number of deaths due to summer heat. So, it's really quite astounding. One of the other things I love about trees that I learned kind of fairly recently was that they actually have chemicals called phytoncides, which are released by trees, and they have been shown to affect our human microbiomes and actually boost our immune systems. As I say, that there's so many benefits from trees, a lot that we probably haven't even discovered yet. And it's just fantastic to have them around. I think a really important thing to consider is the unfortunate unequal access that there are to trees. The most affluent areas in a neighbourhood have been shown to have significantly more trees than those living in areas of lower affluence. And that means that, people who are living in wealthier areas have that access to those benefits that trees provide. But also there's been research to show that people living in areas of higher social deprivation experience the effects of the benefits of trees to an even greater extent. So trees are amazingly actually what we call ecogenic, so that they actually help to reduce health inequalities. So again, I could talk about it all day, but trees are just, there's no end to the benefits and the amazing things that they can do.
That's a great word, ecogenic. Amazing. I don't know, have you heard of the 330-300 rule?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is something I came across, again, working in Copenhagen. And it's really cool. It's a rule that states that everyone should be able to see at least 3 trees from their home. 30% of everyone's neighborhood should be covered with tree canopy, and no one should live further than 300 meters from a park or green space. And I think it's a really cool ambition and an aim. But hopefully it touches on what you mentioned.
Just to jump in on that and link the two those two things. So we recently worked on something called the Tree Equity Score, which is an online map that's available to anyone, and it's freely available to use. We worked with the Woodland Trust and American Forests to bring Tree Equity Score to the UK, and it's based on that 30% rule. So it's looking at all urban areas in the whole of the UK, and saying that they should all have a target of reaching that 30% tree canopy coverage. And it looks at each neighbourhood and says how far off it is reaching that goal. But it also takes into account other socioeconomic factors and environmental factors as well, and adjusts the kind of target and the weighting and the score of that neighbourhood based on, whether people are, whether it is a less affluent neighbourhood and that kind of thing. So helping people to prioritise where to plant those trees. It's a really transformative tool, really, and really fantastic. And we're already working with different NHS sites on how they can be making use of that tool as well. But again, maybe something to put in the show notes.
Yeah, that's amazing.
People can have a little play and see what their local area is.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll put in the show notes is a paper that I've written on kind of the health benefits of urban green space. I think it kind of pulls us into back to NHS Forest, and one of the things that I think is really important in terms of getting more of the nation moving more and more often is really changing the environment in which we live, because actually that's one of the big issues, I think, is we live in these kind of obesogenic environments which don't often at times favor movement. And I think green space becomes a really important part of that, because it's such a huge facilitator of getting people out there if the space is available. it's one of the most important things to kind of widening the exposure of people that are taking part in some form of physical activity. And as health professionals or people in the general population, we have a real role in advocacy. And if we're passionate about these things, then I think we need to fight the good fight. So back to NHS Forest, we can get our trees growing. What I wonder is if you have any good examples of places where it's happening really well, that can kind of inspire us and motivate us and really set a standard for which we can strive. Dan, do you have any kind of examples of that?
One thing I wanted to touch on, but maybe Sarah might be able to specify on particular practices, is the Greener Practice Network, which I'm sure a lot of people on the call sort of listening would be aware of. But if they're not, it's definitely a fantastic platform for GPs to connect, share success stories, and lobby and advocate for a greener network of practices across the UK. So I think that's something that the UK is doing very well. And there's, I think, something definitely for the show notes, just linking their website in, because they've got a whole host of resources out there that would be definitely worthwhile diving into.
And I'm happy to share some specific examples as well of places we've worked with, Callum. So one that absolutely springs to mind is Liverpool, and we actually have a nature recovery ranger based there. And this is Liverpool University Hospitals Foundation, NHS Trust, the long-winded version. And so Liverpool has, it's at their Aintree site. They have a woodland area called Bluebell Woods. And this is on the NHS estate, so it's on the hospital site and owned by the NHS. But unfortunately, it was completely unmanaged. It was a place for antisocial behaviour. It's quite near a prison, so they were, finding a lot of kind of antisocial behaviour going on there. And it was steadily declining in biodiversity. But as I mentioned, we based one of our nature recovery rangers there, and they've got a volunteer network called the Friends of Bluebell Woods. And they work together to restore this woodland, essentially. And it's amazing the transformation that's happened there. It's now a thriving woodland. They've got accessible footpaths. They've actually very recently, last month, redone the footpaths to make them wheelchair accessible. And so staff and patients and visitors to the hospital, or even, people living nearby, can walk through these woodlands and just connect with nature. And it's actually become, and I think I visited it actually only just a couple of weeks ago. And I think one of the things that really struck me was the fact that when local people see that more effort is going into kind of maintaining and making it a really nice place, the level of antisocial behaviour declines. So people are littering less because, they can see that other local people, volunteers, are going around doing the litter picking. And it just kind of becomes a nicer environment, and people after that then treat it with more respect and actually make use of it for themselves as well. So it was really lovely to kind of see that firsthand.
That's amazing. It's almost like a social contract is established when people take ownership of that green space. And it's really interesting as well, because I think well-maintained green spaces are really appealing to go to. Whereas if it's not well-maintained, there's often safety concerns, and so it acts as a barrier to going. So that's really interesting. And you may not, and you've given one already though. So any other examples of primary care centres that are proactive in delivering, planting trees or having green space?
Yeah, well, I think the main one that I would think of is the one that I've actually already mentioned, which is this group down in London who created the vegetable growing toolkit. That was a really fantastic initiative that they ran. We have done a lot of tree planting, as I mentioned, at primary care sites, GP surgeries and dentist surgeries as well in this tree planting season. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any kind of specific examples of the ones that have kind of done really well with their tree planting.
So separate to the tree planting, it just sprung to mind my quite new local GP surgery that is based in Oxfordshire. And I've noticed quite a few GPs within the area that have pollinator friendly gardens. And they have a lot of interpretation around it. So they're really showcasing the work that they're doing. And similar to the example that Sarah mentioned with including patients and other volunteers and staff in creating those spaces. Because actually quite a lot of the GPs that I've come across, they don't have a lot of land, but they, really utilize that space as best as they can for the benefit of nature and for people as well. Like I walked past there recently just to register as a patient, and it was just so nice to see bees and butterflies using that space. And it's just like a visually, it's just so much more inviting to go to a practice that, seems to be looking after their space, and it adds to the community feel as well.
Yeah, that's great, and really lovely examples. Maybe what we can do for I promise, my pledge is that if you listen to this and you have a practice that's doing really great stuff, let me know and I'll record a mini episode and I'll give a shout out to all of them. How does that sound? Sarah, I know you wanted to talk.
That sounds great. I was just going to mention it's I guess not strictly a specific example of good tree planting, but a project that we have run with GP surgeries is we call them the Green Health Routes, and this is basically an initiative to map local green spaces starting at a GP surgery through the local area to other parts of that local area. So it might be, through to the library or through to the train station and that kind of thing. And we create these maps and make them available at the GP surgery so that people can pick them up. And that encourages people to then, walk maybe instead of using their car or even to cycle, through the kind of parkland nearby and that kind of thing. And it can even be used in green prescribing as well. So we set up green health route walks where they'd be run by a local walk leader who we would train up, and they'd have weekly walks that people can join, and therefore that's something that someone could be prescribed to as part of a green prescription. So yeah, one of the main ones that we ran was in Oxford, because CSH originally was Oxford based. So yeah, I still have it somewhere. We've got a leaflet of the green health routes that we have around the local area. And it was just a really lovely way of, as I say, connecting people with those local green areas and again, just really encouraging them to get active and doing that from the GP site itself. That's
amazing. As we draw to a close, there's quite a few offerings here, I think, isn't there? The green health routes. If someone wanted to find out a bit more about how maybe you could support them develop a green health route in their area, how would they go about doing that?
Please do just get in touch. We've got the NHS Forest website, and that's got a whole page about the green health routes. And we've got a video there. It gives you a bit more information about them. And we don't have any kind of active projects running on that at the moment, but we would love to kind of gather interest. And if you're looking at setting one up yourself, we'd absolutely be able to support you in that and share the resources that we've already made.
Amazing. That's great. And then we talked already about trees, if you want to plant trees, go on the NHS Forest website and get in touch with Sarah and Dan. And then Dan, you mentioned there's lots of practices, and I think this is probably quite common. There's lots of practices that actually planting trees is challenging. Maybe they're really limited by green space, or they have a car park which limits the ability to grow trees. And you mentioned in Oxfordshire, there's lots of practices that have planters with flowers or whatever it may be. And I'm wondering, is there any capacity or funding for putting planters in your car park or outside the front door?
For specifically like GP practices that might be interested, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Sure. So there's quite a few avenues that a practice could take. So on the top of my head,
I put you on the spot a bit here. I'm sorry.
No, that's absolutely fine. But from my experience, from when I was with the Wildlife Trust, and we did some collaborative projects with GP surgeries or like village halls, sort of similar spaces in that they don't have a lot of space and a lot of it's concrete. We work together to tap into local councillor funding so they can be awarded a certain budget for improving the local community in a variety of different ways. And normally there is like a biodiversity green space budget. So they come up quite frequently. So that's definitely something that I would just, you type in your local council and see what funding is available. So I think that would be one step. Also, there's quite a lot of charitable foundations. And again, I think it's just a simple, like Google, see what local charitable foundation trusts there are that might be able to support you on that. And if you wanted to, I know this isn't specifically like a financial offer, but I know that through my experience of working with the Wildlife Trusts, there's 46 of them across the UK. So there's like 46 and they're county based. And I would definitely suggest a practice that might be struggling with recruiting volunteers and actually have that capacity and resource to be able to implement some of these things, to reach out to their local Wildlife Trust so building that link to then help with that support, because they have a fantastic network of volunteers and could support on some of these projects.
Great. Oh, brilliant advice. And I think that's often really helpful to know is, I want this to happen, but I work in a really busy job and I'm super time pressured. I'm working long hours. Who can I get to help me? So yeah, really great advice. Thank you. Thanks, guys. So just as we close, I give you each the opportunity to give what one take home do you want people to take from this podcast? Sarah, you can go first. Dan, you got a bit longer to think.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Callum. I think for me, the one thing I want people to take away is that understanding that our connection to nature is at the core of what makes us human, and that we shouldn't forget that in our, in this ever-changing world that is more and more reliant on technology and more disconnected from nature. And I think during the pandemic, we saw how much we actually do rely on nature and green space for our health and well-being, going out for our daily walks and that kind of thing. And we began to see more of that reconnection. And I think it's that reconnection that will help us to fully appreciate the challenge that our world is facing in terms of the climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, and the health crisis as well. And finally take the action that we need. I think the natural world does everything it can to help us. And now we really need to do what we can to help nature.
Yeah. And in so doing, we also help ourselves by getting more active, improving our mental well-being and improving our planet. Dan, how about you?
So it's going to be difficult to beat that. But I'll try my best. So I would say first steps would be to build your sort of allies within your practice and your network of GPs within your area, because I think quite often there's potentially like a couple of passionate people within a practice and it gets lost, like and they may feel overwhelmed. And from what some people have said in the past, that can be the case. So finding your allies and working together, like maybe having a few sounding board sessions to really work out the logistics of what can be done, involving the relevant people, estate managers, sustainability leads, practice leads, to make things happen and take that action for nature and for people. And then one last thing is to check out the NHS Forest website.
Brilliant. Oh, guys, well, thank you so much for joining me on the pod. It's super interesting and I really enjoyed the conversation. So please, if you're listening, then check out the show notes. They're going to be pretty extensive, but there'll be lots of nuggets in there. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I really enjoyed my conversation with Dan and Sarah, who are just such advocates for green space. And it's definitely worth going to NHS Forest website with the link in the show notes to find out more and cash in on their offer of offering trees to all general practice sites here in the UK. It was great to have them on for two reasons. Firstly, urban green spaces is something that I'm really passionate about, and I hope this came across in the recording. Changing the environments in which we live, in my opinion, is pivotal to address the physical activity crisis, but also the climate crisis. And GPs must become advocates of this. And secondly, it's the first time that someone has approached us via our website to see if they could come on the podcast. And what a great thing to share with our shared passion. So if you enjoyed listening, or you've listened to other podcasts and want to share some of your thoughts or something you're doing, please reach out and we'd love to have you on the podcast as well. Thanks for listening.